Hi. Today we are just in the shop. I've been in the other tin shop with a master tin and coppersmith that I have an apprenticeship with, but I wanted to show you what really old copper cookware looks like, especially if you're a collector and you're wondering if something is really old or not. We got two pieces in from a new client who handed them off and just said, look, we've never used them. We know they're really old, but we have no idea if they're even salvageable. How can we do it? So we grabbed them. One of them wasn't even true, meaning it didn't sit flat on a cook stove or even on a table. It was really bowed out on the bottom. These are made with a pretty thin gauge of copper. It's not even, I guess it's maybe a millimeter thick, but I mean, you're looking at maybe a millimeter. But it's really old, and I'm gonna show you a way that you can tell if something is old or not, and we're gonna go from there. So let me switch the camera around and I'll show you what I mean. So one of the first ways you're going to know that something is really old is if the handle is made out of copper. This is really old copper, just based on the wear and tear you can tell, but this mark here is really old too, and I have yet to be able to figure out whose mark it is. But the handle's made out of copper, not brass, not even wrought iron, it's copper. That's one of the first ways you can tell that something's old. The other way to tell is, as I was just showing before, these seams here are what we in the copper and tin smithing trade call cramp seams, not dovetail. A lot of people call it dovetail. If you see the lines here, they're straight. They don't flare out at a like a 45-degree angle, or maybe a little less than that. That's a true dovetail seam will have these sides flaring out as opposed to straight. So I would call this a cramp seam. And you can see here we had to braze, I think it was this one. No, it was the other one. But anyway, here's where someone has repaired the seam that was starting to crack, which typically does happen right along where it was done in the flat. So this pot was actually made originally out of two pieces. It was made out of a sheet of copper that came around, and you can see here is, this is a little bit closer to what I would call a dovetail seam because of the flaring, but here's another cramp seam, and then it's made here. And then this is braised and hammered together while it's still hot, and you see the brass where they probably used a braising stick. So that's one way to tell that something is really old. Here's the other one we did, and this is another really old mark. This one was on, oh gosh, I think I have it upside down, but I'm gonna show you the mark in case someone knows what the mark is. Again, we have a copper handle, and this one was leaking as well as it was out of round. So what we did is we heated this middle area with a blowtorch, and slowly, very carefully, bit by bit, so we wouldn't crack the really old copper, hammered it in a circle like this. And I know it looks like it's dented here. It's not. That's just color. Discoloration is actually perfectly flat. So now it actually sits on the stove, and here's where we had to repair it. So we braised this area where there was this whole part had cracked open, and then we braised it, and we filed off the brazing, and then it was able to be non-leaking. We made sure we put extra tin when we tinned this. Another way, I mean, what we did to the inside, we used a bead blast, and we tried to take off all the old tin. Someone had put like an epoxy in this, trying to probably keep the copper from showing through, and it was like a plastic, so we had to grind that off. And you can see how old it is based on some of the pitting here in the tin, or in the copper, and it's really hard to tin some of that, but this is now food safe, which is, you know, pretty awesome. So they'll be able to use these for the first time, and they will work as good as they did, and probably based on the seam work, I would say early 1800s That's my guess. That's Bob's guess. Bob's the master tin and coppersmith I work under, and his guess is pre-1830s, just based on the seams. They really kind of stopped using those cramp seams by the end of the fur trade, 1830, 1840. So there you go. There's a little tutorial on really old